Thank you guys for joining us today. We're going to do a webinar about a safer spring break, a guide for parents and families. My name is Laura Beth Rogers. I am the graduate assistant for the Parent and Family Services here at UAB, and we are joined by Christina Canfield. She'll kind of give an introduction about who she is and what she does a little bit better than I can. So I'm just going to walk you through some of the technological aspects of this webinar. So as you guys can see on your screen, you can press escape if you do not want to view this webinar in full screen. If you have things to do and you just kind of want to listen, or if you are watching and you decide that you need to do something in the middle of the webinar, just press escape. Or you can use the view option up here and you can press exit full screen. Either one of those work. It's all about preference. Or if you're having issues with audio, or if you need it just a little bit louder, you can come down here to audio settings, and on the menu, press speakers, and this will pop up. You can adjust your volume here and make any adjustments you may need if you just kind of play around with it if it's too loud or too soft. Right here in the middle, these are really important buttons. You'll see a lower or raise hand and then a Q&A. This button right here is just going to let us know that you have something to say or that you have a question. A more effective way is to go ahead and press the Q&A button. You'll be able to actually type out the question here, and we'll be able to see your question directly instead of having to wait on us to ask why your hand is raised and if you have a question. Another really cool feature about this is you can actually bump up other people's questions if they have a similar question as you, and we can kind of focus on where your questions are and where we need to fill in the gaps for the presentation. It's really important for us to know what you guys need, so please make sure to use this feature. So now I'm going to turn it over to Christina, and she is going to get us started.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and get my PowerPoint pulled up here for y'all so that you will see this screen. I can't seem to get having some technical difficulties. It does happen. There we go. Okay. Had some extra slides kind of come up. Okay, that's not how to. I'm so sorry, y'all. Here we go. I'm working on pulling up my PowerPoint, and it's Monday. Hey, we all have a case of the Mondays, no matter what, which I love. So here we go. Share our screen. I'm going to verify that we can see the screen on the, not yet. Okay. Okay. Let's do a new share. We are going to share this screen right here. Make sure we're sharing. All right, here we go. Looks like we're sharing our screen now, so I want to make sure everyone can see this. Today we are talking about a safer spring break, a guide for parents and families. This is my beautiful beach scene. This is where I wish I could be for spring break. So that works for me. And this is me, a not so updated picture of myself, but the most professional one that I have. Definitely from the generation of selfies. So this was my professional headshot I had to share with y'all. But my name's Christina Canfield. If you've done webinars with Parent and Family Services in the past, then you know that I did one. Just if we're unable to stream to Facebook. We're having just a few technical difficulties this morning. Let's see if we can't fix it. Okay, so if you logged in with us in the fall, then you know that we did a let's see if we can fix this Facebook feature real quick. on the page. We're going to get this all fixed. Even our technology is having a true Monday morning. And we're getting that uploaded. So we're live streaming this on Facebook too for people who aren't using the Zoom platform, and that's what's taking us a few minutes to get going, just to make sure everyone can see everything we have available. Okay, here we go. So alcohol and spring break is where we're at, and this is a guide for parents and families. And in case you're just tuning in, my name is Christina Canfield. I am the Substance Abuse Prevention and Recovery Coordinator for our UAB Wellness Promotion Department. It's a super long title. And so a little bit about what I do here at UAB is I'm tasked with all of our drug and alcohol prevention and education on campus, but I also manage our collegiate recovery community, which is for our students who are in recovery from substance use disorders. So I have a pretty broad range of things that I do here at UAB, but it's all centered on alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, whether it's prevention education or it's helping students in recovery reintegrate back into the higher ed scene, or maybe there are students who have already identified that they might have a substance use disorder, and so I'm helping them get the help that they need as well. So pretty broad job I'm tasked with, and I love every bit of it. Wellness promotion is a newer department here at UAB. We are growing exponentially. We do everything from alcohol, tobacco, and other drug prevention and education, plus the collegiate recovery community. We also do interpersonal violence prevention and education, and we manage the promoters of wellness, which is our peer health and wellness educators. And so we do a lot, and it's all centered around health and well-being in our office. My email address is on the screen. That is the best and fastest way to reach me if you have any questions after this webinar. The best way to reach me is always via email. I'm not a person who's often sitting at their desk. I'm usually out and about in the community and talking with students and working with staff and faculty. And so I'm pretty tough to get on the phone, but really easy to reach via email. And that's our website too. If you go to uab.edu/students/wellness, you can see a lot of the other programs that we're doing. I've been doing this work for a long time. Got really interested in doing alcohol and drug prevention and education when I was in graduate school. I've been doing collegiate recovery work since about 2009 as well. So I've been doing this we're going on 10 years now. It's kind of exciting. So I really love what I do. One thing I always share with people is that I'm a person in long-term recovery. I found recovery when I was in college. So I'm super passionate about making sure that our students stay as safe and healthy as they possibly can and make healthier choices while they are here at UAB. So I want to talk about spring break. Let's see if I can make this full screen. Nope, it's okay. So let's talk about spring break and why we need to talk about this. Because we know that there are certain times during the school year that are higher risk in regards to alcohol and drug use. So, contrary to popular belief or what the media or society wants us to believe, students are not out there partying all 24/7 all the time, like we see in some movies. Every time I present to students and families and even faculty and staff, I always have them really think about what society tells us about alcohol and drug use in college, and think of every movie you've ever seen about college and the message that we get. And so we send this kind of mixed up message to our students that this is a time to experiment, but it's also, our brains are also still growing, and our brains are not fully developed until the age of 25. So alcohol and drug use can play a really big role in our later developmental stages of our brain. And so there are some higher risk times that we have to be really cognizant of when students are coming to college. Those first 6 weeks of school, especially freshman year, those are crucial. They are critical. That is why we spend so much time doing a lot of drug and alcohol education with students before they get here and during those first 6 weeks. this summer we'll be launching a program for parents and families as well, where we'll be communicating with you even more about how to talk to your student before they get here, so that they have all of the tools that they need to be successful. Post-finals, I mean, you know, the stress of the semester is over. We want to unwind. So that sometimes is a higher risk time for people to engage in riskier drinking behaviors. Also, at some universities, you have traditions that are passed down through generations of students. At some universities, that might be tailgates or certain football game weekends, or at my alma mater, their St. Patty's Day was a really big deal because all of the bars were like just off campus. And so that was a tradition that had been passed down generation through generation of students at my alma mater. But we knew that that was a high-risk time, and our Office of Health Promotion on that campus was able to really do a lot of education around that time. And then spring break. Spring break universally is a pretty high-risk time for students in college when it comes to engaging in alcohol and other drug behavior. And so we want to keep them safer. And one thing we know through a lot of research out there is that students still heavily rely on their parents or their family members for health and wellness information. So we're out there and we're beating the pavement, we're talking to students, and we're doing programming all of the time on these topics. But at the end of the day, the person they're still most likely to ask is you. They may come to me, maybe we've developed that relationship. They may come to one of my coworkers, or they may come to one of my students, but most of the time the students are still relying on you. And so we want to make sure that we're talking with parents and families about these higher risk times as well. So let's really break down spring break. And, you know, every time I think about spring break, I'm definitely from that MTV generation. I grew up in the 80s when MTV was like a really big deal. And then, you know, eventually they released the, you know, MTV Spring Break series. And that's what you always saw, were all these people like out on the beach, and they were drinking, and there were bands. And so I really grew up in this generation that glorified this idea of spring break. And we want students to have a time where they can pull back and they can relax and they can unwind and they can do some self-care in the middle of the semester. It's really, really important. It's why, you know, in our jobs, we have vacation time, because we need that time to relax our mind and put ourselves back together to get through maybe the rest of the year or the rest of a planning cycle. And so it is an important time. However, as a society, we've really twisted it into this idea that it's supposed to be this time to party. And party and unwind and relax are not always necessarily the same thing. And so we need to be having those conversations. So these are just some, you know, spring break by the numbers. There was a study done in 2012 that was published in the Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs. And it revealed that students who went on longer trips engaged in more high-risk behavior. So, for example, the longer students were at whatever their destination was, the more likely they were to engage in these behaviors. Students who took shorter trips, maybe they took an extended weekend trip, then they were less likely to engage in high-risk behavior. So I think that's pretty interesting. If your student is making a plan to be at a spring break destination for the entire week of spring break, their likelihood of engaging in higher-risk behavior increases the more days they're on that vacation. Your students' perception matters. So the more that they perceive that spring break is all about partying, the more likely they are to engage in partying behaviors. And that kind of makes sense, right? We talked about this message that society sends about what spring break is supposed to be about, all of the different movies and TV shows that really put this idea out into the universe that this is a time for partying. If our students are going to spring break with this idea, like, I'm going to get drunk, I'm going to, you know, do these things, that's probably what they're going to do. Their perception matters. If they perceive that everyone around them is going to be partying and so they are too, they're more likely to engage in those behaviors. If we help change their perception that this time could actually be used for something else, then we can help them engage in less riskier behaviors. Their intention also matters, and it's the same idea. People who intend to spend their spring break drinking, they're going to have higher blood alcohol content levels. They're going to end up engaging in other high-risk behaviors as well. So we want to help them change their intention. We want to help them see that there are other things they could be doing on spring break. And I always tell students, I'm not here to tell them how to live their lives. I'm not here to tell them you better not drink or you better not do drugs. Of course, I always remind them that the legal drinking age is 21 years old and drugs are still illegal in the state of Alabama. So if you're staying in Alabama, for spring break. They need to know that. Some really popular spring break destinations, of course, are in that panhandle of Florida, really close to us, South Carolina. And I used to live in deep South Texas. And so South Padre Island there was a really big spring break destination when I was there. And it was interesting because Texas is a huge state and there are a lot of universities in Texas, and they recognized that there was an issue with spring break incidents, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And so the universities in Texas started to really stagger their spring break weeks so that not everybody was on spring break at the same time. So, you know, if your student's going on a trip for spring break, here are some things you need to know. The death toll and traffic accidents at spring break destinations. So they looked at the death toll and traffic accidents in places like South Carolina, the panhandle of Florida, I believe South Padre Island was another one, and a couple of other really major spring break destinations. And they looked at the death toll and car accidents, and those rose just over 9% among drivers under the age of 25. Traffic incidents altogether go up about 23 to 24% during that week of spring break, during that time of spring break. So we're seeing higher incidents with traffic accidents, and we're seeing higher incidents of traffic fatalities. And a lot of that is due to substances, driving after using substances. And so we need to make sure we're talking with our students about not consuming, whether it be drugs or alcohol, and getting behind the wheel of a car or getting in the car of someone else who has been using substances. We also know from the American College of Health that the average male will consume 18 drinks a day, and the average female will consume 10 drinks a day during their time at spring break. And that's if they go with that intention of partying. And what's super dangerous about that is that for males, the binge drinking is defined as 5 standard drinks. And for women, it's 4 standard drinks. So we're talking about more than tripling what we consider binge drinking. And so this becomes very high risk for alcohol poisoning and other health issues. So not just, this take away all the other things like interpersonal violence or sexual violence, but we're talking about the risk for alcohol poisoning is greatly raised. But remember, intention matters. And just a reminder, you can post any questions in the Q&A box on your Zoom, or if you're on Facebook, please post a question under the post. I can answer questions live. If you are going to watch the recording of this, you can post questions. I will likely see them, and Meredith will see them and let me know that there is a question that I need to answer. So why are we talking about this? Because I'm going to tell you, we have been doing some serious programming on campus all last week and this week too. So last week was what we called Safer Spring Break Week, where we actually went out and we talked to students. We did lots of programming to talk to them about things like drugs and alcohol, but also sun safety and eye safety and bystander intervention, where, if you see something, say something, and how do you properly intervene if something is going on that you think is not okay. So we've been doing a lot of programming last week with your student around campus. This week we have signs up all around campus reminding them of the dangers of drinking and driving, the costs of drinking and driving. The average DUI is $10,000 in the state of Alabama. And so if they're going somewhere else, the average DUI could be more expensive. It could be less expensive, but you can typically plan on spending about 10 grand. And so we're doing our part on campus, but I told you earlier that students so heavily rely on their families for health and wellness information. And so you can also play a role in helping your student have a safer spring break. And so some things that you can talk to about, and I'll start over here on the right because I already mentioned the DUI. Please remind them not to drink and drive ever. Ever. There's no reason to get behind the wheel of a car in the age of Uber or Lyft. And one thing you can do as a family member is allow them to use your rideshare account. We talked to some parents earlier this year, and that was one suggestion that one of them had that they used with their student. And I thought, wow, what a great idea. So if you have an Uber or Lyft account, please allow your student to have access to that. But then also follow that up with non-judgment. So if your student is in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and they use your Uber or Lyft app at 2 a.m., please be non-judgmental and understanding and proud that they actually use something for a safer ride home. And make sure you talk about the dangers and consequences, such as the average cost of the DUI being $10,000. What's really important when we're talking with our student about consequences is if it's in your power to take away their car or their car insurance or whatever whatever your consequence as their family member is when it comes to getting a DUI. And when I used to work in inpatient treatment, like I shared this a lot with family members, is we can't be paper tigers. So we can't set a consequence and then not follow through on the consequence. So if I'm setting consequences with my student regarding this type of behavior, I want to make sure it's a consequence I will actually plan to follow through on. Because if I can't follow through on that consequence, or I don't follow through on that consequence, I'm essentially a paper tiger. And so I'm roaring really loud, but I'm never really going to attack. I'm never going to follow through on anything, and they will know that. And so that's something really important that we always have to keep in mind. And so talk about excessive drinking. We went over those, actually pretty scary numbers about drinking during spring break, and suggest that your student decide in advance on their limit. Hopefully their limit is below binge drinking rates, which is, again, 5 standard drinks for males in one sitting and 4 standard drinks for females in one sitting. And we want to make sure that they set that limit before they even go, because remember, intention and perception matter. And so if I intend to drink, but I intend to only drink 3 drinks, then I'm more likely to stick with that intention. Also help them plan how will they refuse a substance once their limit has been reached. So if they intend to set a drink limit of 3 standard drinks in a sitting while they're at their spring break destination, help them figure out how they're going to refuse. What are they going to do? What are some tips and tricks that they can have? Such as maybe having a glass of sparkling water with a lime in it, where it may look like to other people they have an alcoholic beverage in their hand, but they don't, and so they don't feel left out, and they don't feel singled out either. It looks like they have a drink in their hand, but they don't, because they know they've reached their limit, and then how they can refuse any further drinks. They need to know the signs of alcohol poisoning and how to get help. This is huge. Making sure they know about mental confusion, a person who's unresponsive, that they're gasping for air, maybe they're cold to the touch, maybe they're throwing up, or they can't throw up. They're really, really out of it and they can't throw up is a big, big, big warning sign for alcohol poisoning. Maybe their breathing is erratic, or they're really pale, or they're turning blue around their lips or their fingertips. We want to know how to get help. So if you know your student is going to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, have them understand where they can get help. Of course, we want them to call 911, and we want them to stay with their friend. The biggest thing I always tell students when I present to them on this information is that if a person you are drinking with is showing signs of alcohol poisoning or alcohol overdose, do not ever, ever, ever leave them alone. The worst thing we can do is to abandon a person who's experiencing these symptoms. So make sure they know how to get help, how to call 911, and to stay with their person, because the buddy system is important. And that's our 4th point. Never, ever, ever leave a party alone. Always have a friend with you. Let people know where you're going and when to expect you back. And that's really for any time of day. If you absolutely have to leave your group and you're going to run to the store and get something, make sure that your friends know exactly where you're going. Oh, I'm going to CVS down here on the corner. I should be back in 20 minutes. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, here's what you should do. And maybe that sounds drastic, but this is the time of year where we're higher risk for other incidents as well. So we always want to have a buddy system. And plus, when we're at a party together, if someone were to do something like slip something in my drink, or maybe someone is hitting on me and I'm uncomfortable with how they're acting around me, having that buddy with me and having a plan with that buddy for how to get out of an intense situation becomes very, very, very important. And last but not least, make sure your student knows to stay hydrated. Whether they're on the beach or between drinks, water is always, always, always their friend. If they are going to choose to consume alcohol during spring break, then they should be drinking at least 8 ounces of water for every standard drink that they have. And anytime they're outside and it's hot, it's not very hot here in Birmingham today. The air was kind of hurting my face with how cold it is. But they should always be staying hydrated and drinking water as much as possible. And so, I don't know, maybe you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, well, that's great, but how do I have this conversation? This feels really awkward. And I'm thinking back to when I was in college, and my parents definitely never had these conversations with me. Maybe they should have. I don't know. What I do know is that I want to help this next generation of family members talk to their student about these things and make this a comfortable conversation, or as comfortable as possible. And so I've put together some talking tips, and this is straight from our publication that will be coming out for orientation this season. And so we're really excited to be helping parents learn how to talk to their student and family members talk to their student about alcohol and drugs. So discuss your expectations with your student along with the facts. So we gave you some great facts today. You can also Google some other facts. If you need more facts, if there's a specific substance you want to talk about, please don't hesitate to email me. But a conversation should never sound like, don't do it because I said so, or if you drink on spring break, I'm going to kill you when you get back. Like, those should never be the conversation. There shouldn't be veiled threats. And just like I said earlier, there cannot be consequences that you actually do not plan to uphold. These expectations should be something that your student can adhere to, and you know that you can adhere to as well. What we hear from so many people is that conversation sounds like, well, just don't do it because I said so. It needs to be a little deeper than that and have the facts. One of the most important conversations you can have with your student is about the dangers of mixing substances. And by mixing substances, I'm not just talking about, beer before liquor, never been sicker, right? But also mixing alcohol with any other substances. And that includes over-the-counter medication and prescriptions. So some antibiotics, some other prescription medication can really interact poorly with alcohol, and we don't want that. If your student is on a certain medication, for whatever reason, they need to know what interaction it has with alcohol, because it could lower their tolerance significantly. Or it could interact with alcohol in a way that could make them very, very ill. A lot of people don't realize that cold and cough medicine also interacts poorly with alcohol. And so we don't want them to be taking cold or cough medicine and then also drinking alcohol on top of that. Mixing substances like benzodiazepines, which are things like Valium, Xanax, or Klonopin, with opioid medications such as pain medication, Vicodin, Percocet, oxycodone, Oxycontin, things like that. We never want to mix those two medications, and we never, ever, ever want to mix those medications with alcohol, because all of them depress our respiratory system, which leads to a higher risk of overdose. It's such an important conversation to have, just to reduce your students' potential harm. Ensure that they always know where and how to seek help for themselves or a friend. If you know their spring break destination, which I hope you do, then you're talking about their plans. What if you need help? Where do you go? Where's the nearest emergency room? And things like that. Always be calm, be open, and be prepared to listen. This is not a time to lecture or to be judgmental. It's a time to have an open conversation. Your student is a growing young adult, and they need to know that you're there to actually help them through these things and not be judgmental. So help them have a plan. What will they do in a situation where they are uncomfortable? How will they utilize that buddy system? Always reiterate that. What's their plan if their designated driver decides to use substances? Because maybe they do a great job of designating someone to be that DD for the night, but then they decide to drink or use another substance. What's their plan? Do they have access to your rideshare app so that they can't use the excuse that it was too expensive? I'm going to tell you, we did a survey of almost 400 students in the fall regarding drinking and driving behaviors at UAB, because we were really shocked by the amount of students that choose to drink and drive at UAB, and we wanted to know why. One of their biggest answers was that Uber or Lyft was too expensive for them. So kind of asking their parents to share that burden of cost with them could really, not to overstate it, but it could save their life while they're at spring break. What will they do if someone is showing signs of alcohol poisoning or overdose? Do they know how to respond? Make sure they know to never leave that person alone, to make sure that person is lying on their side while they're waiting for help because they've called 911. That person should never be lying on their back or on their stomach so they don't suffocate or choke on their own vomit should they throw up. So these are things we want to make sure we're talking with our students. We hope none of these things ever happen, but I kind of like to plan for the worst and hope for the absolute best, because I have planned for the worst. And so at the bottom of your screen, what you'll see is a little example. So we could start the conversation like, You know, I know this might be uncomfortable for us to talk about, but with spring break right around the corner, I think it's really important for us to talk about alcohol and drugs. I love you and I want to make sure that you and your friends are safe and know that we can talk about these things anytime. And then kind of go into your conversation. And you don't have to use that exact script. If that exact script is uncomfortable or it feels a little cheesy or doesn't fit your personality, that's okay. But for someone who may not know exactly what to say, this is a good example of where you can start. We always, again, want to use that non-judgmental and open tone with our students. So if you have questions, again, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box or on the comments on Facebook. And so we talked about society has really given us this idea of what spring break should be about, but here's some alternative ideas. So alternative spring breaks have really caught on college campuses over the years. Here at UAB, we have Blazers on Break. It's hosted by our Student Involvement and Leadership Department. And Blazers on Break allows students to spend their spring break engaged in some sort of service. And so they go to different locations around the U.S. However, those applications are typically due in the fall, usually around October. So it's too late to get your Blazer at Blazers on Break this year, but if they are coming back in the fall, and we hope that they are unless they're graduating, make sure they know that, hey, next year for spring break, you could go on this really awesome service trip and get a lot of great experience they can put on their resume, on their CV when they graduate. And they know that they need to get those applications in before, I believe it's sometime in October that they're due. Hey, take a family getaway. Students who spend break with their families engage in fewer high-risk activities, which just makes a lot of common sense to me. I was less likely to engage in, drinking or drug use behaviors when I was around my parents. So this is a great time for the family to get together and go make some memories. I'm 35 years old, going on 36. I live far away from my family. And these moments are fewer and further between as we all sort of grow up and we've all started our own families. So what a great opportunity to make some family memories. It doesn't have to be for the whole week. It could be an extended weekend. Have your student take a service trip. It doesn't have to be Blazers on Break. There are actually agencies across the country that match students up with their own service trips. One thing is to make sure you do your research on those agencies and make sure they are legitimate agencies. You may even want to talk with our Student Involvement Leadership office here on campus to make sure maybe they have a relationship with those agencies, but they don't have to do it through UAB. They could do it through their service trip. Maybe your local church has a service trip that they're doing as well. Some academic departments do service trips. When I was in graduate school, we did a service trip over spring break. I didn't personally go, but we had the option to go, I believe, to Honduras. So even some of the academic departments have their own service trips that your student may want to look into. And, above all, remind them that there are ways to unwind that don't include alcohol or drugs. Help them brainstorm what those are. Some students may choose to work and make extra money over spring break, or they may choose to just, hey, go home and sleep. I've had students tell me that. I've asked them, what'd you do over spring break? And they're like, I slept so much, and it was amazing, which is pretty much what I would do with my spring break if I was still a student, because I have a toddler, therefore sleep is not as much as I would like it to be. So one thing you can do is follow Wellness Promotion on Instagram for more safer spring break tips. We've been posting all last week and we'll continue to post all this week with some really great tips. And you can even take those tips and share them with your student, or you can ensure that your student also follows us on Instagram, because we post all kinds of health and wellness tips throughout the year, as well as share our different activities we have going on that are typically around alcohol and other drugs or interpersonal violence prevention. So the biggest thing at the end of the day is to have that conversation and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to do it. Okay, I would rather have this conversation with my student than wish that I had, because we all want to keep our Blazers as safe as possible during spring break. So again, if you're watching the replay, make sure that you post any questions. And I will be happy to get back with you with any answers. Do we have any questions right now that popped up? No. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you. I hope you have a great day.